listening to The Starting Zone, a podcast about World of Warcraft and the people who play it. And now, here are your hosts.
Well, hello and welcome to The Starting Zone, the podcast about World of Warcraft and people who play it. Today is March 15th, 2023, and my name is Spencer Downey. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing to the podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by my co-host, Jason Lucas. Jason, how are you doing on this fine Wednesday?
Oh, Spencer, hello. I'm doing well. Yeah, I'm sliding the schedule around again this week, but that's been sort of the order of the day for 2023. But that's okay because here we are, and we made it work, and we're ready to talk some WoW.
That's right, exactly. Man, oh man. So let's jump in. What'd you do this last week in World of Warcraft?
Well, it's weird. It's a bit weird, right? Because we recorded on Thursday last week, which is after I do most of my WoW stuff for the week anyway. And then now we're into Wednesday, and I've already done some of my stuff for this week. But
you can cover that if you want. You want to talk about last night? Talk about Reset Day?
The big things going on for me right now, like Raid is in a weird spot because I think we just don't really have the appetite for Mythic Taros pulls, and so we're just not getting them, which is okay. It's a little disappointing for me personally, even though I'm not like a huge Mythic raider. Like I don't really like Mythic raiding, but we realistically have another 3 months or so in this raid, so I would like to have some different goals and different stuff to do.
Right.
But we're not getting the turnout, so we're not getting the pulls in. I do want to say, like overall, I think Heroic Vault is like one of the best raids they've done in many years. We ended up full clearing the rest of the ID on Sunday with people who haven't been raiding regularly. We had not like a bad group, but just a group of people that some of which were kind of underexperienced and undergeared, and the fights just feel really smooth. There's not those moments where it's like, okay, if this happens to this person who doesn't know how to handle it or doesn't have this certain item level, then the raid's going to die. Like that doesn't happen in this raid that much. So that feels awesome. And it's fun to just be able to grab whoever wants to come and do heroic bosses, not normal bosses, which is kind of what we've done in the past. Last night,
it's nice to feel coming out of last expansion and its raids. Like they've moved away from every boss has a thing that if someone fails doing, you basically wipe. I mean, like Halcyon and Anduin and like all of or Halandra, sorry, and Anduin, and like there's so many bosses. The council guys at the end, the Dreadlords, like there's just so many bosses where that was the case, and you just had to. Even the whatever the worm was, the second boss in there. Was a boss where if people didn't stack up properly, then you just wiped. Like you're just like, okay, well, like
one person couldn't figure out how to get in the stack, and now we just have to lose. Yeah, there's really not as much stuff like that. I mean, there's some stuff that if you do it wrong, it'll kill you. And if enough of that happens, then obviously you can't win. But overall, I really enjoy this raid. It's just the only thing is like it's positioned in that spot where it's the very beginning of the expansion. It's the first raid, and I have sort of just burnt through most of my goals so fast, and it's like I don't really want to like level up more characters and gear them up into the process just to do this raid and like kind of, I don't know, inject some life into it. So I'd rather just have time away from it in that case, even though the raid itself, I think, is really great, and I'm expecting some more tuning downwards, but overall, like I think it feels really good right now, and it's set up for the end of the process here. I mean, this is something we talked about a lot in Sepulchre. I feel like at the end of season 3 Shadowlands, like it just wasn't quite there. Like it just never actually felt that good week to week. As we sort of got to that midway point. And we're just like, man, just nudge it a little bit more, as interest kind of falls off. And, I think Vault's a lot closer to where I want it to be at this point in its lifespan. The other thing, obviously, is Keystones. That's my big goal, I think, with Season 1 that's left and that's attainable is teleports to all the Keystone dungeons from doing time plus 20s. Last week was rough. I ended up doing 8 Keystones, which I haven't been doing, all 8. but I didn't get any ports. I did 7 +20s and didn't. The only one I got in time was Shadow Moon Burial Grounds, which is kind of a gimme. It's just the easiest dungeon in the pool and the most generous timer by a mile. So at least I started with +20 keys for this week. But that was kind of frustrating because last week it wasn't like super hard, but the combo was just disruptive and time consuming enough that, it resulted in some near misses on a couple that I needed. This week we have kind of a favorable week for Tyrannical, which we'll talk about a bit more, but I did actually, I managed to slay Ruby life pools last night with most of my 80% of my usual squad. So finally got my revenge in there, and it feels good because it's been a couple weeks since I got a port. So that was awesome. Other than that, like last week, I did Aiding the Accord right away, and I was like, all right, I'm gonna stay on top of stuff. I'm gonna do all the world quests this week. I'm gonna do my fishing dailies, and I'm gonna do this, that, and the other. And by about Thursday, I was just kind of done, and I didn't pick it back up. Like there's no benefit, it doesn't feel fun in the moment. Right. So the only thing I'm really serious about is profession knowledge and staying on top of that. There's no catch up for that. There's no substitute for it, and it's going to pay dividends all expansion and maybe even longer. So I am very serious about, okay, resets up. Okay, I got my checklist. Let me go get all of my knowledge for the week and do what I need to do. And I mean, that's been paying off. I was able to make a couple 418 shields for a couple guildies last week because they had the things, the consumables that you need to bump the item level up, and being able to do that stuff is awesome. That's a really nice piece of gear that you can provide to a prot or holy paladin for them to then use for the rest of the tier without having to rely on drops or anything. So
yeah,
that's the number one thing. It's like, okay, if I'm not going to do anything else in WoW on my own time this week, I'm going to get my knowledge maxed out for the week.
Yeah.
And when I say maxed out, obviously you have the shards of knowledge, but they're so unreliable. Like you can grind dirt piles all day long and never see one. So I'm just talking about the stuff that is guaranteed to drop up to a certain threshold.
Right. Yeah, I hear that. It can be frustrating when you've hit that point of the season, and we're, as you said, probably 3 months away from leaving this raid, and you've basically felt like you've accomplished the goals you have. Right. It becomes down to, what are the next goals you can actually set for yourself that make you want to engage with the game? Inside your particular case, obviously, mythic rating was one of the things that you were like, hey, this would be a fun thing for us to work towards, but it's heavily reliant on people being around to do that with you, unless you're sort of going off and abandoning your team on raid days to sort of raid with other people to try and accomplish that with someone else who has a more established team, and that's what's happening with it. So, I mean, you're just in that situation right now of, what is it that I want to do with my World of Warcraft time when I'm actually playing it? Or is it a good time for me to, step back from playing the game as often to be able to, do something else, play something else, spend time doing something else at the moment? Because it's a wicked time to be like, yeah, you know what? There's this, you did the Jolly Roger achievement a while ago where you were like going back and farming up a bunch of stuff besides Stranglethorn. Like things like that suddenly start to sort of surface for players who are reaching this point of their gaming, season, where they're like, hey, what's an older objective that I never got around to doing that I want to go and do? What's an older thing that happened that I really want to spend some time engaging in? So I think that it might take a little bit for you to sort of find that for you, and it might happen next week. You might be like, hey, you know what? I'm going to do Heritage Armors. There's 2 more Heritage Armors being added in. We got the new patch coming in. There's going to be new content coming in with the new island for me to explore. This is at least a couple of weeks of stuff for me to do that I'm going to have fun doing. And then from there, you sort of, decide what's up next.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's also a consequence of having this accelerated release cycle, right? Where we're getting maybe smaller chunks of stuff to do, but on a more consistent schedule. It's like, well, the way I play, I kind of chew up that stuff and then I'm ready for something new. So yeah, I mean, we do have a patch coming in next week. There's going to be a lot of new stuff to do and stuff that is relevant even to geared characters. There's going to be good catch-up mechanisms for characters that, aren't geared. And maybe if they're strong enough, then that might be a good reason to level up some more characters. Because right now, what you have to do to get a character from a solo play perspective ready for like normal raid is so grindy. And it's not really that fun. Like you're just in Primal Storms all day. And I don't want to do that. And that's a big reason why I haven't done it. And I don't have the kind of playtime. Like I'm not gonna sit in Mythic Q pugs all day long, and I'm not gonna do LFR and all that. I have no appetite for that either. So I think with Forbidden Reach and stuff coming out next week, there's going to be some good opportunity for stuff like that, and I'm sure I'll chew all that up way before 10.1 comes out. But I'm okay if that's the kind of cycle we're going to be on for this expansion. That actually sounds good to me. Let me have something to laser focus on for a month or two, and then let me dial it down for a month or two, and then we'll do the new stuff when it gets here. I think it's okay versus a world where it's all or nothing, where it's like, well, you do this for 4 hours a day every day, or else somebody else might be getting a little bit more of this currency than you, or where it's like, well, there's all this stuff to do, but there's no reason to do it, and you don't want to do any of it at all ever anyway. And that's kind of like BFA versus Shadowlands in a way. And so this feels a bit different because it's like there's stuff you definitely want to do. It's just once you have done it, well, now what? And the answer is repeatable stuff, which I like to do with my friends.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's hop into what's going on this week in World of Warcraft. All right, this week is the Battleground bonus event where the Sign of Battle buff is up, increasing your honor gains from Battlegrounds, objectives, and wins by 50%, as well as there's a quest you can pick up to win 4 of those random Battlegrounds, which gets you some conquest and some marks of honor. This is a great one for people who just enjoy doing BGs. Like, just across the board, this is just a nice benefit. Because even if you're just getting a whole bunch of honor, you can then spend that honor to get more marks of honor, which then gets you more transmog stuff, if that's where you're actually at, if you're done with your gear. So it is just a nice extra bonus. I like it. When it comes to aiding the Accord, your dungeon quests, your PvP quests, we have ourselves the 3K rep for completing 5 world quests, which requires you to complete 5 world quests for aiding the Accord. We got the dungeon quest for Uldaman, Legacy of Tyr, and Algathar's Academy, which gets you some extra reputation if you pick up those quests and complete them. And then PvP quests are Epic Battlegrounds and Rated Battlegrounds. So those sort of symbiotically tie in with the Battleground bonus event. So you'll get yourself.
If you like
Battlegrounds,
man, yeah. This is a great week for you if you're a Battlegrounds player.
Yeah, would you like more honor with your honor?
You get the weekly and both PvP quests, instanced PvP quests, just all in the same kind of realm there.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I mean, obviously you got to do rated BGs, but if you have all of this stuff on your weekly slate anyway, then you just get these 3 quests done probably.
Yeah, exactly. And the PvP brawl for the week is Gravity Lapse. So that's Eye of the Storm with every 1 minute the gravity turns off and everyone sort of floats up into space. And you basically have to be sure that you're not going to float over top of a chasm when it turns back on and you fall. So just, watch your feet. This is one of the very first brawls they put into the game. At the time, it seemed like a very unique sort of quirky thing to do. Now it just feels kind of lame compared to the other ones that are out there. So I feel like they could go back and revamp some of these older brawls. I feel like they could tweak them a bit and make them a little bit more cool and interesting. I'd like to see gravity pads that when you stepped on launched you into the air and had gravity off for a period of time, so that you could actually use it as like a way to traverse the map differently or something. Yeah,
used to get around the different capture points in Eye of the Storm faster or something.
Yeah.
That could be cool. Yeah, this one's a little moldy. It's not fun enough to really make it a thing that you feel like you need to check out. I mean, it's there if you're trying to, get conquest farmed out and do all of the stuff, then this is a thing to put on the list. But if you're like a casual brawls observer, this isn't one of the ones that I would be like, yeah, make sure you queue up for one of these this week. It's fine. It's okay.
Yeah. Weekly world boss for the week is Strunran, the Sky Misery. That's the Storm Proto-Drake in Ohanar Plains. So make sure you're getting out there to get your 395 loot as far as your plate, feet, mail, waist, leather legs, cloth wrist, and a primary stat trinket with a haste proc. And our Mythic Plus affixes for the week are Tyrannical, Raging, and Storming. So this means that boss enemies have more health and deal increased damage. When slain, non-boss enemies... Sorry, not when slain, sorry. That is not the right thing. Non-boss enemies enrage at 30% or less health. dealing 50% increased damage until defeated, and while in combat, enemies periodically summon damaging whirlwinds. So Raging and Storm, so Raging in general doesn't really sync up with Storming, kinda, and it definitely doesn't sync up with Tyrannical, because it doesn't affect boss enemies at all, so you don't have to worry about Raging Tyrannical, which is nice. But Storming sliding in there can be a little bit tricky. Obviously on bosses, when you have whirlwinds happening, doing mechanics can get more complicated, particularly in tighter spaces. If you're in a smaller room and you have whirlwinds whirling around, it can be even dangerous for your tank to just grab them, because then your tank might be not in a position where they're able to actually avoid or dodge something, and it's tyrannical, which means that you can get hit really hard. So Storming is kind of the spicy one this week, mixed in with the tyrannical. Raging, I think, is not really a factor. Your trash is going to be not so bad to get through, as long as you're paying attention to your thundering affix and you're not wandering into storms when you're trying to run your thunderings together. I think you'll be just fine as far as that goes. Don't forget you can dispel ragings. Anything that is a enrage effect that can be dispelled by druids and hunters and rogues and all those folks. Be sure you're getting rid of the raging buff, particularly on those big old AoE casting mobs. Whenever they drop below 30% health.
Yeah, there's a couple mobs in particular, like Ruby Life Pools, for example. There are the lightning channelers. I'm not exactly sure what they're called, but they're the mobs that do the big thunderstorm AoE leading up to last boss. And yeah, an enraged one of those, even on Tyrannical Week, is going to hurt really bad, especially on higher keys. So if you don't have a soothe effect available, then you better have some cooldowns ready when stuff like that happens. And so that can be unavoidable. But yeah, overall, I mean, trash is pretty, it's pretty favorable this week. So big pulls are fine. You know, again, this isn't an on-death effect, and it is dispellable. So chain pulling is okay if that's what you want to do. If you want to set up, you know, triple pulls or whatever, you're not going to be punished necessarily by the affixes as that much. I mean, you will get more stormings the more things you're in combat with, which can be obnoxious. They don't really hurt very bad if they even still do damage, but they do disrupt you quite a bit. The knockback is annoying. And there's other stuff in the dungeons that do knock ups or knocks back, right? So that you can kind of end up getting massively displaced if a couple things happen at once. But yeah, overall, this is not a bad Tyrannical Week. I think, honestly, the more I do this and the more I'm kind of in that plus 20 range, I think Tyrannical keys are slightly easier this season because the trash is so punishing in most of these dungeons. Like, most dungeons have pretty complex sets of enemies, and they're tuned to be pretty threatening. And so when you have to fight that many of them for half an hour over the course of a dungeon, Fortified just feels a lot worse versus, you know, the bosses obviously they're alive longer, they're more dangerous, but like, you know, the bosses are dangerous anyway, and you're, you know, a lot of times you might be planning to use, you know, Hero, Time Warp, Lust there anyway, whatever the Evoker one is. I don't know what it's called. I'm sorry, Evokers. So if you're doing, you know, if you're lining stuff up like that anyway, then you're getting kind of the correct benefit there on Tyrannical. I don't know. I mean, like I said, I finally knocked over Ruby Life Pools with this week's combo, which I've been trying to do for a few weeks here. So part of that is practice, and part of that is just playing well. But overall, this is a pretty favorable combo. Yeah, storming can be a problem when you're trying to clear thundering, and there are specific bosses where a storming in the wrong place at the wrong time can result in a death or something really bad happening. But you know, the affixes are there for a reason. There's never a week where the affixes are just a thing you can ignore. So you just got to play around them. But overall, this is a pretty good Tyrannical Week if you're trying to do Keystone Master or Keystone Hero, or there's something else you're shooting for. Like, it's really, really not a terrible week.
Yeah, I'll tell you why you don't know the name of the Evoker spell. It's because it's called Fury of the Aspects. So unless you're saying, okay. Fury, which doesn't really work with Fury Warriors around, there isn't really a way to call for it well, other than saying Hero or Lust. Those two things just are such a ingrained thing. Even Time Warp is something that is more recognizable than Fury of the
Yeah.
Aspects. No one's going to say something that long.
No, even your evoker is going to be like, I'm supposed to do what? Oh,
Yeah.
that you wanted me to do that. You wanted me to hero. Okay.
Yeah.
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 Right. Yeah.
So that's why you don't know the name of it. Unfortunately, it was named something very cool, but it's just so long and there's no good short form for it unless people start calling it FA. Like that's really the, thing that works, but you need something.
Maybe I don't, I'm not holding my breath on that one.
Exactly,
I don't think it's catching
right?
on.
Like it's not, yeah. So like to me, it's just a case of like, I guess if there was a better, maybe so evokers or people who raid with evokers who have some sort of great snappy line for how they call for evoker lust, please feel free to share with us because I'm kind of curious because I think they probably just call it Lust or Hero. I don't think there's a way to remember Fury of the Aspects and say it in the middle of a poll. Maybe what they're trying to do is make it long enough and awkward enough to say that there was very hard to make a mistake where someone asks about it and then it accidentally gets cast, because that's the number one thing that happens all the time, right? Is someone's like,
That's true.
So when are we going to lust? And then it happens immediately because someone
hears
said the word
and,
lust. But yeah, it is what it is. Anyways.
Anyway, use that spell on the bosses in your keystones this week. Yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely use that spell on the bosses. Yeah. No, good call. Good tip. Micro Holiday, we got Ungrow Madness. We talked about this last week. It's kicking off in just a couple of days on the 17th, runs till the 19th. Basically, you go down to Ungrow Crater, you kill a bunch of dinosaurs, you collect your dino mojo, you get yourself some adaptations, make your character all funky, and kill some crazy elites. It's just a silly micro holiday, but anything that brings you back to the crater, man, that crater is just a cool spot. Like everyone I think remembers at some point wandering through the desert and falling into this bizarro jungle filled with dinosaurs and robo apes and whatnot. Like, man, it's quite the zone.
It's like one of the best zones I think ever, still to this day. Maybe not in terms of overall design or whatever, but like certainly in terms of theming and just how cool it is. There's really nothing. There's nothing here that like you can take with you, but it is fun. Like especially if you go there with a friend or two and just get all the mojos and get like super overpowered and kill all the dinos. Like, I don't know, if you're waiting for your friends to log on to start raid or dungeons or PvP or something, like this is a good way to kill time.
Yeah,
it's fun. It's fun, but like if you don't participate in it, you're not missing anything at all. There is nothing on March 20th that you're going to be like, oh man, I forgot to do Ungrow Madness this year.
Right.
It just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, and honestly though, there should be a dinosaur pet that you can get, and then you can get like a little herd of dinosaur pets that follow you around. I want like a little T-Rex and a little Triceratops and a little Stegosaurus and a little all following me around if I can for like a week.
That'd be cool.
Come on.
Do like the 5-day thing like they do with hippogriffs or
Exactly.
Minkin or whatever. Yeah, we could. Yeah, maybe for the next micro holiday refresh.
Give me my little dino pets that just chase me around, and eventually the Triceratops the Stegosaurus can say to the T-Rex, "Curse your inevitable betrayal." But anyways,
right.
Anyways, moving on. We have ourselves Trial of Style. That's going to be kicking off on the 20th to the 24th, and this actually does have new stuff. So be sure you are prepping all your transmogs for this. Basically, it's a 6-player scenario that people can group into. You can actually choose to go, with all 6 people, or you can queue in solo, and it'll put you with 6 randoms or 5 other randoms. And you basically have 2 minutes to create a transmog set are based off of a theme for that scenario. So they'll tell you what the theme is at the beginning. You can run around to the different vendors that are in there, because they'll have ones who sell like tabards and things like that sometimes. But in general, you're just using the time to transmog and make an outfit that'll be themed like summer or fire or winter or whatever it is, silly or beach or something like that. And you essentially put together an outfit, and you go up on stage, and you basically round robin who you're against until everyone's had a chance to pair off against everyone. And everyone else votes on who they like from those outfits. And then depending on that, you get a ranking and a prize. And you can win the contest and get yourself a bunch of tokens. And then you use the tokens to buy yourself transmog. And it's cool. So if you enjoy yourself some Trial of Style, it's coming up. You won't see it again for like 5 months. So be sure you take advantage.
It's March and September is when Trial of Style runs. Yeah. So this is one of your 2 chances for this year. And yeah, this is a super fun event. If you've never done it, I mean, it's been in for a while now, but I know, people have been in and out of the game a lot over the last few years. So this might have been something that was off people's radar who are now back playing Dragonflight. Like, if you could get a full group of 6 friends like in voice chat doing this, it's hilarious. It's a super good time. And, this is the first time we've seen it, I think, since all the transmog rules changed.
Yeah.
And the pool of stuff you can transmog is huge compared to what it used to be now because of all the white and gray items.
Mm-hmm.
So you could do some really wacky stuff with your Trial of Style looks. And there are some new rewards. It's really fun. And you should definitely do it if you've never done it before. If you haven't done it in a while, it might be worth trying to put one together this week as well because, you got a lot of new options and you got some new rewards to get. One thing is it used to be free transmog and barbershop for the duration of the event. Then they made the barbershop free anyway. But your transmog is still free between the 20th and the 24th. So that's awesome. Just a really fun event. It's the kind of thing that I sort of wish that they did it more often than twice a year, but that might also ruin some of the magic. And kind of the knock we had on it recently was that they just weren't adding enough stuff to the reward table. It was stagnant for a really long time. And it was like, well, there's really no reason to continue to revisit it without some new stuff to get. Like, it's fun, but it's hard to drum up the fun with, especially with a group of 5 other people when there's nothing anybody wants off of the reward vendor, like at the end of the day, we are still WoW players and we want to feel like we're getting something either for our character power or a collection for the time that we put into the game. Like, yes, we want it to be fun, but we also want some kind of, some kind of payout, some kind of reward for doing a thing. Yeah. And there's, that kind of ran dry with Trial a little bit over the last couple of years, but now they've been, they added the boots and stuff. Was that last year or 21? I don't remember. And then they added some stuff recently. So, that is a little, that sweetens the deal a little bit if you haven't done it in a while. But yeah, take some friends and do that this week because it's super fun. You'll laugh. You'll have a good time.
My only complaint is that typically these things line up with real life events. And if this happened 3 weeks earlier, it would line up with Paris Fashion Week. And I think Paris Fashion Week would have been a great way to line up with Trial of Style. Just, it's one of those things.
Yeah.
Put it out there.
Really.
If 3 weeks sooner,
Yeah, the fashion industry could learn a thing or two from Trial of Style, I'm sure.
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, but, there's a lot of controversy or grumbling out there about, this weekend they're doing Season 2 PTR testing for Keystone Dungeons on 10.1 PTR, and it's also Diablo 4 Early Access Beta weekend. Mm-hmm. And people are not thrilled about this, but count your lucky stars. The Trial of Style dodged the whole thing. Yeah. Once you're done with all that stuff for the weekend, then you can get ready for the real event, which is Trial coming up on the 20th.
Yeah. Although if it happened 3 weeks sooner, I'm just saying, Paris Fashion Week would have worked out well.
One way or the other, they gotta.
Got to look at lining that up, All right, notable hot fixes that we have going for the live game revolve around raids primarily. We have ourselves Razageth getting some nerfs on Heroic and Mythic. Electro Lash, Volatile Current, Storm Surge, the actual amount that the Storm Surge shield absorbs, and the Lingering Charge periodic damage, all brought down by 20% on Heroic difficulty. So just substantially reining those in to try and give some more teams some time to start clearing through this and getting into their farm, which I like because guess what next week is? It's, hey, someone wants to spend time doing some new content stuff. Not necessarily on raids, but as far as their game time goes and how they want to commit it, let's get those raid kills in and start getting farm nights down to being 1 to 2 days a week for a lot of these teams so that they have more time to play the new stuff that they want to play. So I like this. I like seeing this. Mythic got similar pass as far as Electro Lash, Volatile Current damage, and the Absorb for the Storm Surge, all brought down by 20%. We also saw Lingering Charge periodic damage by 20%, and the Primalist Stormseeker's Storm Bolt damage reduced by 25%. In this, they also made it so that Fulminating Charge now snares players instead of rooting them, and basically the tooltip for it isn't going to be updated until a later patch, but you'll notice that, hey, I can actually move around when Fulminating Charge is happening as opposed to being rooted in place. You just get slowed, so keep that in mind. Like, overall, this is going to be a really big shift for this boss, for both Heroic and Mythic, and we'll see a lot of teams start to knock it out now that were really close before, so good to see.
Yeah, I mean, these nerfs are pretty huge, actually,
Yeah.
in practice. The biggest thing is the Storm Surge Absorb Shield nerf. Knocking 20% off that Absorb is massive. Um, Razageth, at least on Heroic, is not a real tight numbers check, but there are certain thresholds you want to be able to hit in order to progress the fight comfortably. But you could have an issue where maybe you could kind of limp your way through phase one, but then you have this kind of hard stop on the Absorb Shield, which is the most punishing part of the fight, in my opinion, on Heroic for like a DPS check. Because as long as you're doing the fight, you will probably have enough. As long as not everybody in your raid is dead, you'll have enough gas left at the end to kill it in phase 3. But if you can't break the Storm Surge shields, then you can't get there. But so this is a massive nerf, and we did this last night post nerf. My healing crew was a little sketchy. I was like 4 healing for about a 20-player group, which is okay, except I was missing my superstar Resto Druid. So the damage still felt pretty noticeable. I also had some undergeared people in there who were taking a lot more damage than other people typically take. Yes, these are big nerfs to outgoing damage, but in my experience, they might have been the only reason why people survived the fight, honestly. But the Storm Surge shield, it's like it wasn't even there. It was just dying so fast. It was unbelievable. So this is good. I would like to see, and I expect that we're going to see another pass on some of the vault bosses just as we get really down to the wire here. But overall, like, Raz is feeling really good. It's the only end boss in 3 or 4 years, maybe longer than that I haven't dreaded trying to re-clear every week. It dies in 1 or 2 pulls every week, even with new people getting ahead of the curve every week or people rotating in alts or whatever. So if you're still working on Raz Prog, like, I'm sure this was a huge boon this week. It's, looking at like WoW progress completion percentages and kill rates, it's still a little low, and it's still probably much harder than Broodkeeper overall, especially if you have a good Broodkeeper strat. So, like, yeah, it probably needs to just be. I don't know. I guess we'll see how players deal with the nerfs to it at this point, and what the results of it are, and if they feel like they need to move it a bit more. But yeah, this fight feels great. I think these are really good changes.
Well, I mean, I'll say that there's still only 79 or 76 Alliance teams that have actually killed it. So it's,
Right.
on Mythic. So we're at that point where Hall of Fame still isn't closed. And it's on the Alliance side. We've been, 4 weeks now, I think, since the Horde one closed, or close
Something
to it,
like
3 or 4 weeks.
Something like that, yeah.
So we're at that point where it's
Yeah.
like, okay, guys, we actually need to like start wrapping this up at some point here. So
what they need to do is just make the Alliance Hall of Fame 50 guilds, because there's just not enough players. Like, they're just not there. So I don't know. That's a whole other conversation.
Yeah. All right. Anyways, moving on. We have a post here that's a rather exciting one to sort of read. This is about 10.1, and it's about inviting both factions of players to a guild. This is a very novel idea that I don't think anyone has thought of before, but it could be quite useful for a game like this. So basically there was a post that went out that said that they are testing the implementation of allowing players to be able to actually play in other like faction guilds. So players who have been joining cross-faction instances now have the ability to join the same guild as their opposing faction friends and benefit from conveniences that like shared chat and guild repairs. Guilds are still affiliated with either Horde or Alliance, depending on the faction of the guild leader, and guild achievements and guild vendors, for example, will still reflect the guild's primary faction. So opposite faction members may benefit from unlocked shared perks, but may be unable to contribute to certain achievements, like Alliance Slayer, for example. If you're a Alliance guild and you have Horde people in it, the Horde people in the guild can't contribute to progression towards the Alliance Slayer achievement, that kind of concept. this is our first step of potentially several in publicly testing this long-awaited feature. It was long-awaited? Were we? I think we were expecting this at some point. So keep an eye out.
Somebody, I must not be in those circles, but someone must have mentioned it, through feedback channels at some point. I don't know.
At some point, yeah. It's probably in the community forums at some point. Yeah, anyways. Keep an eye out for updates as we look forward to reading your experiences in the feedback thread of the PTR cycle. And there was a slightly earlier post that said the ability to invite opposite faction players to a guild is available for testing on the Embers of Neltharion 10.1 PTR. Here's a few things that we'd like to bring to attention for this test. We're hoping to bring this feature to the game in Embers of Neltharion update, but depending on the extent of issues uncovered during public testing, we may need to delay it in order to provide the best possible experience. We're enabling a work-in-progress version of the functionality at the offset of PTR to give us the most possible time to identify and address issues. This is a focused implementation aimed at allowing players who have been enjoying cross-faction instances the ability to join the same guild as their opposing faction friends and benefit from conveniences like shared chat and guild repairs. So we'll obviously have a link to that post in our show notes. If you want to head on over there and leave feedback, feel free. I know you can even use the in-game, report feature to actually do that sort of feedback inside PTR situations, and they do read those and they enjoy them. So be sure you are submitting things like that. But yeah, in general, this is the long-awaited, massively overdue thing that will hopefully allow people to stop having to use communities, which is just not a very good feature at the moment that they need to have a hard look at for communicating as a guild. Because it's kind of a bummer to feel like you just need to use communities all the time to communicate like this. So I am excited for cross-faction guilds to be in place because I just feel like it is a massive quality of life shift. Even aside from the RP and the being able to play with your buddies and the freedom of that, the actual quality of life experience of this is just going to be really big for a lot of people.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the time has come, but the tech is what it is, and it was funny because this was announced sort of front and center for 10.1, right? That was one of the first things that they got out in front of 2 weeks ago with what 10.1 was going to be. But the post from Bornak makes it very clear, like, this is not a sure thing to roll out in 10.1, which makes sense, right? You think about how the game's been around. It's been up for almost 19 years, and they started working on this game in 1999. Like, the guild backbone is one of the oldest parts of the game left, I guess. I mean, it's never had a revamp to this degree.
Chat feature, but yes.
Yeah, right. Like, who knows how, and that's, that's one of the main things that you use a chat feature for, right? Is communicating with your guild. And even the chat feature's probably gotten more updates how it actually works than guilds have over the years.
Probably.
Guilds got rolled into the communities revamp, but we've complained about the communities feature on this show many a time, and it's okay, it works, but it's so unwieldy and it doesn't really feel integrated into the game.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure what to even do to change that, but this is, just opening up guild functionality is the way that we need it to go. This is what we need. Now we just got to take it to the cross realm level someday, if we could get there. But we'll stick with one thing at a time. But anyway, I do think it's telling. Like, it was kind of smart of Bornak to get out in front of that and just say, the scope of this is relatively small, right? This means that Alliance players can join Horde guilds. This is what this means. It's not, the guild itself is not a cross-faction entity, right? Like, you're joining an existing entity and playing by the rules of it. And we're going to hope it doesn't entirely break the game. And if it doesn't, then we'll probably ship it in 10.1. I think it's important to keep that stuff in mind as we follow this development, and the PTR process that, I think at this point we've waited this long. Is it worth potentially breaking the game to try to get this into 10.1, or can we wait a little longer to make sure it's the way it needs to be? And I'm certainly on team, give it as much time as it needs. Because even with we look how much weird stuff we had happen when cross-faction groups were brought in at the end of Shadowlands. Like, that was a little rocky for a little bit, and this is a much bigger change, I would think. So we'll keep an eye on it, but it's cool it's happening. It gives people so much more flexibility for who they want to play with and how they want to, express their characters in the game. And that's awesome. It also gives you, access for your guild group to just have a wider array of, racials and stuff at your disposal, which might change up your strats. And I have a few people who have sort of been on the outside looking in because they really just wanted to play Horde tunes, but they still wanted to play with the guild. But like, okay, I'll invite you through my BNet friends list and you can come to raid, but like, you're not in the guild. Like, you don't have the benefits of being in the guild. And even though you as an individual are a guild member, like, your tune is not in the guild. So you don't have, you don't have the chat, you don't have the bank, you don't have all the stuff that makes it easy to play with your guild mates. And so, yeah, it's great that they're doing this. I think for my particular group, it's going to have minimal impact. I'll have like 3 or 4 people playing like Horde tunes in the guild. Maybe another couple people will faction change their mains if they want to, but it's not going to be some huge like recruiting boon or something, but it will be huge quality of life, and it'll just be more fun for the people that want to make, opposite faction tunes. So
yeah,
that's awesome. And hopefully it doesn't break anything and it ships soon.
Yeah, hope so. All right, the 10.1 PTR stuff, because you recognize that 10.0.7 is coming out next week, which means that there's not like a whole bunch of new stuff happening with that at the moment. The 10.1 PTR stuff going on, obviously the new zones are like caverns. The actual cavern world quests, objectives, rares, and dragon writing are now available for testing, so you can actually head out to that zone and start checking out the world quests and dragon writing and whatnot that's there. The new underground zone is located on the eastern side of Onaran Plains, just outside Valdrakken. So if you're trying to find it on the PTR, feel free to do that. Players can access the zone by flying through the tunnel leading to the new zone. This is kind of a wicked concept of taking your dragon and diving it down into a tunnel in the ground and tracing your way through a tunnel network to open into a large chasm of an underground zone. Sounds awesome. Like, that's just, this like as a concept sounds amazing. I'm sure it's not quite as amazing in practice because you probably pass through something instanced-wise or whatever as you go through this. But it's a neat concept. I dig that a lot. There's also the Farak assaults going on. So Farak forces are gathering resources at suffusion camps located in the Azure Span of Onaran Plains, Azure Span and Onaran Plains. And you basically disrupt their efforts to lure Farak and his disciples out, and then you obviously fight them, and you get the rewards for completing the assault. We did cover the new upgrade system, but Jason, is there anything new in the upgrade system that we want to go over with the Flintstones?
Well, there's really nothing. There's no information that we've gotten since our discussion last week, but this is apparently available for testing. I haven't played 10.1 PTR at all, just as a disclaimer, but this is available for testing, so you can go see like what it kind of looks like in practice. We got some questions into the mailbox and stuff this week about like, well, about the crests. Like, are they like deterministic? Do I get them? How many of them do I get? And I don't think we know for sure at this point. They're definitely tied to the difficulty of the content that you're doing.
Right.
Because they're broken up between essentially like LFR, normal, heroic, and mythic item level ranges. And these are the items that you need to, upgrade your gear to these various thresholds, like your crafted gear, for example. But yeah, we haven't had like blue text to a breakdown of like, okay, this is how your crests get distributed. But it seems like, considering that they're in the PTR notes, that you should be able to hop on PTR and kind of get a feel for how that works if you want to spend some time in there doing, like end game stuff and see how that goes. But yeah, this is going to be, I feel like this is a thing we're going to be talking about a lot over the next many months because it's a big shift, this is a whole system sort of like attached onto or like undergirding the reward system entirely. It affects everything that drops basically from any kind of relevant content, and which is good. I think it's an awesome addition, but it's going to be a lot to wrap our brains around as it initially starts hitting PTR testing and the live game. And it's probably the kind of thing that's going to need a fair bit of tweaking to really get where it needs to be once people are using it every day and using it from season to season and patch to patch. So But it is in there, you can go check out, how it's looking early on.
Yeah, it's certainly something that you're able to go and sort of play around with. I will say that the amount of flight stones and the shadow flame crests that you get are probably very much in flux at the moment as to what they are going to be determining the speed at which they want you upgrading gear and how fast they want you to be able to do all those systems. So I wouldn't take anything you experience on the PTR in general as, true to form as far as pacing goes going forward. Sometimes they even accelerate the system so people can test them further. Or test them more. They might be like, hey, we're going to give you 3 or 4 times as much of this currency as your rewards on PTR because we want people to actually really use the system a lot to sort of flex the amount of pressure on the system when you don't have as many players playing it. Because in general, PTR obviously is not going to have as much of a draw to the player base as live game does. So it's important to actually give people the what they need, the tools they need to be able to test your stuff well. So I would just say, don't take that too true to form. We are seeing
people also don't have as much investment in their PTR characters and in their gear and stuff. So, that could lead to the feedback might just be kind of not as actionable as when people are actually inside the system. Plus, I think just a consequence of, first of all, the player base didn't snap back to the level that maybe Blizzard would have really preferred with Dragonflight release. And you can kind of tell because they've been really heavily marketing Dragonflight in a way that they don't usually in this window. Like they just did a free play weekend and, they put it on sale a few times already. They want to get people into the game. So you already have a diminished player base, and then you have more frequent and more PTRs, which means you have fewer people testing it for less amounts of time.
Yeah.
And so it remains to be seen what kind of impact that's ultimately going to have on how the stuff gets shipped, but just all stuff to keep in mind. Yes, everything in PTR is in flux. That's why it's there. That's why they have it, is to make these kind of sweeping changes at the drop of a hat if they need to. But yeah, I mean, at least it will give you a window into sort of what the design intent is, but yeah, I would expect that this stuff is going to change a lot between even the initial kind of concept and pitch to us as players for what we see implemented, and then how much it changes, once it's up and running for a while.
Yeah, I'm going to be really curious to see what the pacing is that they're going for with this. But there's another change coming in that's probably one of the coolest racial changes I've seen in the game, period. The working class is getting a new racial called Calm the Wolf. And basically, while this is toggled on, you control your Worgen instincts and automatically assume a human form when you leave combat, which means that basically when you go into combat, you wolf out and then do your combat fight. And then when you leave combat, you chill out and go back into being your human form. And you learn this when you learn 2 forms, which I think is just a great feature for Worgen. The number one thing you get all the time is people disliking the sniffing noise that happens with Worgens. And also just the transformation is such a really interesting and cool thing to see. I would love to see it more often without having to put it on a bar and think about it regularly. So I would love for there to be a feature like this, what they're sort of looking at adding, where, hey, you know what, you just do that when you're going to get into combat. And then when you get out of combat, you can go back to being in your human form and run around your human form. So I dig that. I think it's a great change coming in.
Yeah, something that's just been off about the Worgen Fantasy since it came in, I feel like. It's such a cool idea that I don't feel like has ever super come through in the game in a way that is satisfying. And I can't put my finger on what the problem is. I think the idea of the Worgen, the werewolf people is super cool. And it's the kind of thing that I want to play actively. I think the fantasy is super cool, but it hasn't come through that well. And redoing the models certainly helped a lot, and I think opening up the classes a little bit. I do think monks were kind of missing because I don't know. Having a Worgen who's holding a sword or casting a spell is kind of weird to me. I almost feel like Worgen should have been a class. It should have been a whole fighting style. You shift into a wolf form. Maybe I thought that was too much like Druid. I don't know, but stuff like this, I think, helps a lot. It helps realize that fantasy a bit more, and you can choose if that's the way you want your character to be. Then you're in your human form until it's time to do your thing and get into combat, and then you snap back. That's the kind of stuff that I think has been missing from the whole idea of what it means to play a Worgen in this game for going on 13 years. So this is a really cool addition. I think it's taken a while, but they're starting to round it out a bit to where it's like we're going to actually approaching being as cool to play as it seems like on paper, that's good. We want all the different choices to be cool. That's the whole point of having them.
Yeah, exactly. All right. They also did some class tuning and changes and redesign. We're not going to go through all of that, but we will mention that we are seeing design changes for Balanced Druids and for Feral Druids. Evoker are also getting a few redesigns. Marksman Hunter and Survival Hunter are getting some redesigns. Mistweaver Monks, Shadow Priests, and Enhancement Shamans are all getting some redesign as well. And there's a little bit of stuff coming out about tier sets as well, as far as information goes, and so feedback is starting to roll in about those set bonuses too, as to how they're going to be affecting players. So a lot of like tuning and rotational stuff that people are starting to get their hands on and trying to think about. I know Thune, friend of mine, Resto Shaman, very much looking at the Resto Shaman tier set and going, hey, you know what? This forces my character to play a very particular way and really closes a lot of doors. It means I have to use these abilities really frequently because it only enhances these particular abilities. I'd like that broadened out if you could, so that we could actually have a little bit more of a generic bonus that lets me play differently in different situations, as opposed to just, pigeonholing me into one rotation for the entire rest of the tier. So good to see some of the feedback like this coming in.
Yeah, I mean, we just got a PTR build yesterday that we're not going to dive into on today's show because there's just too much to go over. Just but chewing on the initial release that we saw last week. But these are obviously not going to be the sum total of class changes, and these are not going to be their final implementations of any of them. All this stuff is going to be this is why they do PTRs, to do this stuff. It's looking like, my initial take on this is that Balanced Druid is getting a big pass, and Shadow Priest is getting a massive pass. Like Shadow Priest is getting the 10.0.7 Ret Paladin treatment, or maybe even more than that. So it's a good thing, but like we always say, how much is too much? Like how they have touched Druids so much since it came out, and it's like, at what point do people just throw their hands up and go, I don't know what I'm doing with this character every 2 months because of this much changes? And I don't know. I'm not seeing a lot of that out there, but I'm just wondering. I mean, they have the ability to do it. The talent system gives them the framework to do it relatively quickly,
right? And
in a way that like players can understand and interact with. And I think in many cases, the specs that they've really seemed to target and do a lot of work to midstream here were ones that people were begging to get some more attention. So that's great. But yeah, I guess to me, that's the thing to really keep your eye on coming out of this patch is Shadow Priest. That's the one that's really getting the big makeover.
Yeah. It's going to be interesting to see how all these actually pan out and feel, because I do think that there's going to be a lot of feedback, and it's important to get your feedback in about how a class feels and rotationally if you're someone who really cares about that, as far as like min-max goes, right? Because that's the big thing for a lot of players, is trying to optimize their rotation, and if the optimal rotation isn't something that's very fun, then it can kind of kill playing the class for you. But if you're someone who just enjoys playing the class in general and doing what you want to do, and I'm sure you can do most heroic content without having to worry about playing the optimal way, then it probably doesn't affect you as much, and maybe it isn't important to you to check it out. But if it's important to you, you should go on PTR and play around with it and see how it feels and see if that's something you're interested in, and leave the feedback, because they've been changing stuff based off feedback, so keep leaving feedback. We also get to discover 8 new dragon riding glyphs and 2 new dragon riding traits. The first trait is ground skimming, where dragon riding near the ground, you regenerate 1 vigor every 30 seconds. This effect does not occur while affected by Thrill of the Skies. And then the second one is Land's Blessing, where ground skimming generates 1 vigor every 20 seconds. So obviously, just the concept of playing around with getting really close to that water, really close to the ground, and gaining back vigor, so you can maintain this like pod racing style feeling of riding a dragon around.
Yeah, it seems really good, especially for moving to this like cavern zone that we're going to be in. I assume it's still pretty vertical, but even in like Onaran Plains, end up in these spots where it's like, oh, I guess I got to land for a couple seconds here, and that just feels so bad. So, dragon riding, I think, is one of the huge successes of this expansion, and adding more stuff to it sounds great. Adding new traits sounds really good. So it's cool to see that come in a new version patch. Getting, because that was another question we had. Like, is this the end of this? Is this just kind of a thing to do the first week the expansion's out, and then you just have it? Or are they going to expand on this system as time goes on? And so there's the answer to that. There's at least going to be this much new stuff. So it's awesome. I think dragon riding is super fun and rewarding, just sort of as its own thing, and being able to do it even more efficiently. I like that. So yeah. Maybe this is the end of it. Maybe we don't see any more new glyphs for this expansion or anything, and any new traits. But if I think if they stop there, we are seeing some new stuff even come in 10.0.7 next week. So yeah, obviously it's stuff they're still thinking about. They're still kind of injecting new styles of gameplay into that system. So it's awesome. I really like it. It was a thing that when they showed it to us, I was like, okay, this seems dumb, but man, the game where any part of the game where you can't dragon ride just feels weird now.
Yeah, yeah, it does actually. Anything old world just starts to feel very strange. It really does. All right, player versus player. Critical strikes now deal 150% of base damage and healing in PvP combat was 175. So like right off the bat, nerfs to just how much crit damage you can take from critical strikes. Just down by 25%, trying to reduce that spikiness, which we actually talked about, I think 3 or 4 weeks ago now, in PvP with a lot of the tuning that they're doing. We also see things like Gladiator's Distinction, the PvP trinket with the 2-set bonus no longer provides crowd control reduction. So trying to actually brain in some of these trinkets, but while doing that, they're saying that their interrupt duration changes are also kicking in, where the below changes for interrupts are game-wide and not PvP specific, where developers say that we feel this change would have a minimal impact in other content due to how creatures and spells work. So they're changing up how interrupts work to a certain degree. And basically most kicks and are spent on spells that have inherent cooldowns longer than the duration of the interrupt. So they're also going to be keeping an extra consideration for some of these in the coming season. I think that the changes that they're referring to, because I don't actually see them in our notes here, are reducing the cooldown on interrupts to actually make them a little bit more quick to use. Because in most cases, when you're using an interrupt, you basically are interrupting something that has a 8-second cooldown internal, which means that you're now knocking them back on an 8-second internal cooldown. So that's part of it. Let me actually check here to see if they have the interrupt stuff, because I do want to actually cover that in here, but maybe we'll jump to something else and I'll come back to it. Jason, you want to talk a bit about the new optional reagents that are available for upgrading items higher level when it comes to the non-spark gear and the spark gear?
Well, yeah, I mean, another big part of the this expansion obviously is the profession system, and that was another thing that coming in we were like, well, we'll see how it goes, we'll see how it feels, we'll see how we actually use it and how long it pays off for. But yeah, this stuff was in this initial PTR build, so you can bump stuff up from an item level perspective to be season 2 relevant, which is awesome. I mean, I think that was the big thing that we kind of hoped for, was that, okay, our investment is going to pay immediate dividends, and it seems like it's going to. So, there's new stuff like the Titan Training Matrix rank 5 is in there, which is, it's blue gear. It's not amazing, but if you're trying to get an alt or a character that maybe it just is a bit behind the gear curve, just something so they can start playing 10.1, then you got the Training Matrix gear. But then you got your Whelpling Shadowflame Crest, which is the LFR equivalent stuff. And then for stuff that you need sparks to create, you can use Shadowflame Crest, the worms and the aspects Shadowflame Crest for that, the heroic and mythic stuff. That's in the initial PTR build, so you can do that. And I mean, this is kind of all I really wanted out of the system, I guess. And we'll see how it how it feels in practice. Like, how much skill do I need? How many hoops do I have to jump through to get that good craft on an item that I'm bumping up to season 2 max crafted item level, right? And that's kind of I guess that's my concern, for lack of a better term, at the moment, is like, am I going to have to like really min-max my skill with, enchants and other buffs and optional reagents and, embellishments and all that, and try to max out my tools and max out all my mats? Or like, am I going to be able to just, brute force it in a sense with just the amount of skill, knowledge, the skill points that I'm earning from all the knowledge that I put in or whatever? I guess we'll see. I don't have a good feel for that yet. And again, I haven't played PTR to this point, but I mean, I think this is kind of, it's obvious, right? But it's different to go, well, hopefully in season 2, we'll be able to just upgrade these crafted items versus, hey, this stuff is in the PTR. This is how you do this in 10.1. Like there's a bit of a gap there. So it's nice. It's just there. And that, that, if you've invested in crafting, or somebody has and made stuff for you, that you can keep that stuff and keep it season 2 relevant. That's awesome.
Yeah. So I want to circle back to interrupts because I grabbed the info. What they're doing is they're making Skull Bash, Counterspell, Spearhand Strike, Rebuke, Kick, Wind Shear, Spell Lock, and Pummel all essentially have a decreased duration of the time that they lock players out of that spell school that's been interrupted. And the reason why they're doing this is because they feel that most kicks and interrupts, that when you get interrupted or kicked, the spell that's being interrupted or kicked, typically its actual cooldown that you've now interrupted is longer than the 4 seconds or 6 seconds that something was locking the person out for. So they're just reducing that down so that people aren't essentially locked out of frost spells as a frost mage for 6 seconds. They're making it 5 instead, that kind of idea. To sort of let people sort of spice up the gameplay a bit more and not feel as shut down as they were previously. And they're also applying this to crowd control, which is part of that trinket change that we talked about. Where just across the board, they're reducing the duration of Asphyxiate, Blinding Sleet, Entangling Roots. Like, everything's getting touched by 1 or 2 seconds. Polymorph, like, all of it's getting touched by 1 or 2 seconds. It's probably one of the largest meta-changing things we've seen when it comes to PvP, because things like Rogue Mage Priest rely around having very particular timings about when certain things are going to end, when the next thing's going to be cast, to be able to lock someone down. And this messes with that in general. Like, Kidney Shot duration decreased by 1 second per combo point across the board. So a 5-point Kidney Shot now lasts 5 seconds less long, right? That's just the way it is from what it was before. It's just like a substantial drop in what we're actually seeing in a lot of this CC stuff. You have your Repentance from, Paladins drop from 8 seconds to 6. Blinding Light from 5 seconds to 4. So that extra second might not seem like a lot here, but even like Polymorph from 8 seconds to 6 is a large change for a lot of players in this PvP CC sort of stuff that's going on. So there's going to be a big shift in PvP meta. It's going to involve a lot more actual fighting and a lot less just locking someone down and killing them within that period of time. And it's going to be curious to see how that actually affects a lot of classes and a lot of the combos that we're seeing used inside PvP tournaments. So I'll be excited to see how all that plays out.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely, they're trying to slide that time to kill, a little bit in longer and make it a little bit more interactive, I think, is the kind of the sum total of the changes that you're seeing at a high level here, right? With crit damage being tuned down, and now the interrupt duration is a global change, and I sort of have this immediate reaction to anything that has changed for PvP that affects me in PvE. Just makes my skin crawl, and that goes back to like Wrath of the Lich King days, probably. But when I think about it, it's probably not really that bad. Like, as a tank, it's a little more obnoxious because sometimes I'm trying to interrupt something and move it farther than it wants to go in 3 seconds. But in practice in PvE, I don't think this makes that much of a difference, right? Like, if you have a thing that you need to interrupt, they're designed to either be interrupted by like one person, or they're designed to be on an interrupt rotation, and shaving a second off of how much they're locked out from that school like a mob, it doesn't really make much of a difference. You're still going to need a rotation if you need a rotation right now. So that's okay. Still, we don't, in the modern game, we don't usually see changes like that where stuff that's specifically targeted at PvP has really any effect on PvE at all. But this is so minor that it's not realistically going to make a difference. So I guess that's okay. And we'll see what players think about it. What it does seem. I mean, I don't PvP a lot and I haven't PvP'd in Dragonflight, but like it does seem like kind of a decent shift in the overall kind of flow and timing of PvP combat. So yeah, we'll have to see how it goes over.
Wow, I was muted. I apologize. I was saying, all right, yes, as far as professions go with these hotfixes, you've already touched on a good amount of those changes that are coming in. There are going to be some like tooltip size change things happening too, because we know that they're resizing the size of the professional window. So we'll have to have a look at what some of that looks like down the line. But as far as user interface goes, they are updating the special resource art and animation for the following classes: Arcane Mage, Death Knight, Feral Druid, Windwalker, Monk, Paladin, Rogue, and Warlock. So expect some new shininess for your classes and your resources that you're using, which I think is pretty exciting. The talent loadouts can now be linked to the chat through the share menu, if that's something you were looking to do. And they updated experience and reputation gain animations and effects. We always like the big, shiny, I leveled up or whatnot effect. They're, I assume, talking about things like that as far as reputation and experience gain goes. A consistent pass has been done on scroll bars in the art functionality as well. So you might have some much shinier scroll bars that you can play around with. In edit mode, the cast bar now has an option to show the cast time, which I think is crucially important because a lot of people use WeakAuras for that exact thing. So I'm glad to see that get rolled in. The map size can now be adjusted. Oh my goodness, thank you for allowing me to adjust the mini map size on my screen. It is one of the main reasons a lot of people use a mini-map add-on of some kind, so that's great to see. The Looking for Group I has been added to the micro menu frame, and its size can be adjusted as well if you want that to be more visible for you or less visible. Raid frames will now show more buffs depending on the size of the frames, up to a maximum of 7, as opposed to being capped at 3 where it was before. This is like the first step in the direction of where I need them to go. I just need them to now allow me to actually filter which ones I'm seeing and potentially add specific ones to it. So I'm only seeing certain ones for certain fights. It's a lot of UI work because a lot of these boss mods are pretty extensive as far as the UI work that they put into it. And you'd have to release them with every raid, preferably before every raid if you could. So it's a lot of work, but I like that they're starting to move in this direction, which makes me really happy to see. Frames should no longer drag other elements that weren't manually snapped to them. Thank you. That is a frustrating thing, which I have done many times, where I have brought something near something else, and now I'm like chaining and dragging a whole chunk of my UI across the screen. So I appreciate that. And the experience and reputation bars have been renamed to a more generic status bar 1 and 2, but will still be labeled experience bar for leveling characters. I mean, that's just like a cleaning up kind of method they did. And they also added the /edit mode command, which is great to see because I like / commands because they're super fun to use and you don't have to always hit escape and then click on edit mode when you want to do something. Yeah, so great to see all these changes come in for edit mode. Jason, you got any feelings on some of them?
Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad that this has just been front and center. We get edit mode changes every patch, right? Like the UI overhaul, and not just edit mode even, but like we're seeing other UI changes come in this patch as well, like you mentioned. Like being able to share talent loadouts in chat, that's amazing. I mean, it's stuff that's the kind of thing that is like an obvious feature to have, but just didn't kind of make it into those initial passes. So I'm glad to see that this is just it's yet another knob for them to just adjust when necessary. And the minimap thing and the looking for group thing has been, these are things that I think were really different about how edit mode launched versus what we were used to and we couldn't do anything about. So I think it's going to be a big relief for people, and also fixing the behavior about stuff accidentally snapping to each other, and then you're moving around all kinds of stuff that you don't want to. That's great too. So, yeah, there's also an option to disable chat. Where has that been all my life? That's like I'll take that. I don't usually need that. So yeah, I don't know. Really, some cool changes coming in. One thing I wanted to point out too, just going back to, this is kind of Professions, but it's only because it's an item that comes from Professions. We did get a note about the Elemental Lariat, which is, it's just been kind of default, like the best embellishment to use, really, or, I think most specs would consider it one of their 2 embellishment slots for sure. It is getting kind of a heavy nerf. The duration of the effect is moving to 5 seconds from 12 seconds, but is being increased by 1 second per gem equipped. So, as you gear up and get more gem sockets on your gear and stuff, it sort of returns to its original functionality, which I guess sort of makes sense. Their note basically says that, they realize that it's been really strong and that the condition of having the gem socketed is easy to satisfy. They wanted to rein it in a bit, but they didn't want to do that in the middle of season 1 because people were benefiting from it. But obviously, like, you don't want to automatically invalidate every new piece of gear you're putting in the game with season 2. So instead, they want this redesign / nerf. Like, it's much worse baseline, but it gets better as you gear up. And they feel like that brings it more in line with other jewel crafting effects. And so, it should be at the top end when you have all your sockets set up for season 2 and you have everything socketed. Lariat should be a clear winner over most other items, if not all other items you can put in that slot. But it might not be as good at lower gear or with fewer sockets on your gear overall. So just something to keep in mind. I mean, I'm still seeing questions from people sometimes about, like, what embellishments should I use or whatever, or like, is Lariat worth it at this point? And I would say, like, obviously you need to check and see what your class and spec theory crafters are saying. But if you don't have a Lariat yet, I still think it's probably worth getting one and prioritizing that embellishment slot in most cases. We are still going to be in the season for months. The season, just because this is on PTR doesn't mean the season is ending and that season 2 starts and then this nerf comes in with 10.1. Like, we're talking about June, maybe July here probably. So I would say you probably want to have one of these and you want to get your 3 sockets on it and socket it up and, benefit from that. But keep in mind that you might end up in a spot where, as you progress through season 2 and you're gearing up, there might be these times where if you're losing enough sockets or whatever, that the Lariat is actually not as good as something that might drop from a boss or from a vault reward or something like that. So I think the way they're approaching it is decent. It's kind of even-handed. They're not killing this item, but they're trying to give other items some space, especially at the outset of a new season. So just something to keep in mind. Lariat was a thing that I feel like everybody was talking about the first couple weeks of the season. Like, everybody needed a Lariat. Who has the pattern for Lariat? What's the Lariat? How do I make the Lariat? Can somebody make me the Lariat? How do I put my sockets in my Lariat? That's what we were doing at the outset of season 1. And I think people that weren't on that kind of cutting edge of the gearing curve might be coming in now and going, well, what is this? Why do I care about it? And what's this nerf mean? And how does this work? What's the plan here? So hopefully that kind of sheds a little bit of light on that. I would say if you don't have a Lariat, you probably want one, and you should probably hang on to the one you have even after the nerf, because if you're the kind of player who you get into a spot where, like I am now, I'm just taking currency out of my vault on almost a weekly basis just to add sockets to my gear. Like, if you get into that place by mid-season, then you should absolutely hang on to your Lariat, I think, and plan to level it up. And if you don't have one, I think you should get one as soon as you can so you can benefit from it right now.
Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, that's some good tips for people. When it comes down to the last little bit of stuff inside these notes, they added an option to disable chat entirely, which seems weird in an MMO. But hey, you know what? If you just...
No. It's my favorite.
It's your favorite thing?
My favorite thing.
You just want it off?
Yes.
You just want, no? Okay.
I do not need, check.
All right. Fair enough.
Nothing good ever happens in there for me.
Okay. They also added an option to stop ongoing text-to-speech. And another change with RAID frames that I think was really necessary is the interface RAID frames section now shows a preview of your RAID frames display. So basically you get an overlook of the changes that you're making to them as you're making them, which is important to have, as opposed to making a bunch of changes, then having to escape out of the menu and then join into a RAID group and then have a look at what your RAID frames look like, which is a pain. So I'm glad that they added that. And then also a hover state has been added to all of your options so you can more easily tell which line you are looking at. In other words, it actually highlights what you're looking at. So that's nice to see too. Man, so yeah, that's the 10.1 stuff. And we're going to move into wrap it up.
And that's just the first build. That's the first build and first pass on 10.1 PTR. So it's cool. I mean, this is going to be, I think it's going to be a really cool patch. I'm sort of excited for just where they landed initially. And this is not even getting into the stuff that we're going to be doing on a daily and weekly basis. But, you know, this is a lot, and there's going to be a lot more coming. So I think it's shaping up pretty cool. My only problem is I don't really think I'm going to have time to get in here and check out the PTR, but it's been a long time since my kids were about 1 the last time I had time to play a PTR, so that might have something to do with it. I don't know. Yeah,
it could be. But with that, we're going to give a big shout out and thank you to all of our patrons who help and support our show. I'd like to take a moment to thank some specific patrons. They contribute a lot and really help to improve the content we create. So I'm going to special shout out to Arajian, Celian, Kapawi, Max, Mimble the Mighty, Nick, Shorel, Viper14, and Zalius. Thank you so much for all that all of our patrons give to our show. You all help us produce the show on a regular basis. But man, oh man, our Patreon is over at patreon.com/thestartingzone. We got ourselves some new patrons this week with D. Gibson and Lee J. Thank you so much for hopping in, supporting the show. We appreciate you. Everyone who gives a little bit to help us stay on the air and just keep producing the product we produce is something that we really, really appreciate from everybody. So, yeah, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Well, welcome aboard, new patrons. Glad to have you. And thank you all so much for the support over the many, many years we've been doing the show now. It means a lot. It helps us keep the show at a high level. And I mean, man, it has been a challenge to get the show out on a weekly basis for most of the last 2-3 months because of various scheduling things and stuff that we have going on in our personal and professional lives. So, the Patreon support helps a lot. It helps keep the show moving and helps us pay to make it so that you can download it and all of that stuff. So thank you all so much. We appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. With that, that's going to wrap up episode 569 of The Starting Zone. If you want to leave some comments for the show or check out the show notes, you can find them at thestartingzone@gmail.com, the official website for the Starting Zone podcast. If you want to leave us a review, you can head on over to your iTunes, your Apple Podcasts, and leave us a 5-star. We will read them live here on the show. And since we don't have any in the queue, it means that they'll make it onto our next episode. So get out there and leave us a 5-star. We really appreciate it. Boost us up those charts, helps more people find the show. And if you want to contact the show and leave us your feedback or ask a question, you can email us at thestartingzone@gmail.com or tweet to us on Twitter, or you can join our Discord over at thestartingzone.com/Discord. And if you want to get your hands on some TSC gear, you can find that over at TeePublic. That's teepublic.com/stores/thestartingzone. Got everything from shirts and mugs and stickers and all sorts of fun stuff over there. And Jason, if people are trying to find you on the interwebs, where they can do that, where can they do that?
The best place to find me, as always, over on Twitter. You can find me over there at Shieldwald, and you can find me streaming WoW on twitch.tv/Shieldwald and sometimes youtube.com/Shieldwald. Doing raids and keystones and stuff Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Sundays. So come check that out. And we'll be doing we're making the push on these last couple plus 20s I need, so you can come watch my frustration.
Yeah. It's the cliffhanger suspense of, will he do it this time? Find out next.
Yeah. The answer is probably not, but maybe someday. If you're watching last night, we slayed that RLP, so dreams can come true.
They can. If you're trying to find me, you can find me on Twitter at Spencer_Downey, or you can toss me a follow or a subscribe over at twitch.tv/SpencerHD, youtube.com/@SpencerHD. And with that, for Jason and myself, we want to say thanks for listening, and jobs done.